Hello.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I am Nikhil with Shelf-Esteem, and I'm so excited to be joined by none other than David from Four Corners of the Page, one of my favorite booktubers as we discussed. And I think we have the same edition.
It's a brick.
It is a brick, a tome, one might
Yeah.
even say. Ken Follett's Pillars of the Earth. This is the book that ignited a generation to love historical fiction. This was the second best-selling book of the 20th century. No pressure. This is 900 something pages of pure badassery. And yeah, we are very excited to be able to discuss this for you. Spoiler free for the first bit, and then there'll be delineated spoilers in the next section. But first, let's start off with David. How are you, my friend?
I was going to go the opposite way. I was going to say, it's great that we found this hidden gem that no one else has ever talked about.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Exposed
Maybe
to the
we
man.
should have gone that way. It's okay.
And
We'll edit
it's
that part out, as Brian Lee Durfee says.
it's also quite humorous for me that one of the books apparently in this series is called the Evening and the Morning, because we're pre-recording this and it's 9 minutes past midnight my time, and you've wonderfully gotten up super early. It was 7 a.m. over there to
7
record
a.m.
this. And
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
suffering at opposite ends, but it's
Caffeine
genuinely
cures
worth it.
all, you know? Yeah.
Genuinely worth it to talk to you, my friend. So I'm happy to have the chat.
Likewise, man. Likewise. I'm so excited that we got a chance to read this book together because,
Mhm.
and I know we're going to get into this, but it is such a sprawling epic. There's a lot of
Mhm.
different themes, a lot of different characters, and a lot of time passes. And, one thing that really struck me, and I would love to know from you if there was anything that kind of stood out to you, spoiler free, or that was a kind of a surprise for you. I know for me, the nature of time.
Mhm.
That human life is relatively short to the things that they build, people build, and those outlast generations. And sometimes that is worth the risk of pushing against entropy, against chaos, to try to build something that endures. And I feel like that was an interesting kind of a theme that came out of this book. But
And
what do you think?
you know what? Sorry to interrupt you. I was kind of also, I totally agree with you, and I was
Mhm,
also coming at it from the opposite way, kind of the same way. What happened with me is, we're exposed to this period of history. I mean, the book is set in the 1100s and is about, this cathedral being built in this fictional county that seems to be somewhere in the south of England, I think.
mhm,
And I was like, all these historical figures are laced in. They're not given priority, but they're there. And I had not heard of a single historical figure in this historical fiction book. And so at the beginning, I did have Wikipedia up, and
mhm.
I ended up going on a bit of a deep dive at Wikipedia up on the historical figures, not the book itself. And I'm like, there are all these kings in English history and Scottish history that ruled a significant chunk of land, the land I was born in, for sometimes 20, 30 years. And I
Mm,
didn't have a clue they existed, or what they did, or their power, or their conflicts, because history is so vast. And
mm.
if 800, 900 years passes, even the most significant, weighty human beings ultimately just buckle to
Yeah.
time because of how vast time is. And I guess that's what you're kind of saying, but from the other way round. Would that be fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I forget I forget the book that I've read. I know this is kind of a tangent, but basically piggybacking off your point that,
Yeah.
the most people can hope for is a couple of generations remembering them, which is a very that's maybe a bleak thing sounding thing, but it's really more about the ephemeral nature of time and how, our lives are short, they burn bright, and in the moment they are, extremely important. Everything we do is of extreme importance, but of course the things that we build are the ones that endure. They outlast us.
Does that make you happy? Or are you at peace with that? Or does it unsettle you, the idea that we'll be forgotten in 50, 60 years' time?
I
Most
don't
likely.
know. I maybe it may, at least for me, and I'm sure everyone has a very different answer to this, but for me, it definitely motivates me to want to create more,
Mm,
and also just, it's not like a vanity thing as much as it is like, you know, it's the kind of person you become through that creative process, um, which is have a healthier relationship with that prospect, maybe.
I had a friend. This was years ago, but I always remember it. We'll talk about the book in a minute.
Yeah, yeah.
I had a friend, and it was in university, and we went to the pub, and then we went back to the train station. And on that walk from the pub to the train station, we passed a statue, and he looked at me. He went, "David, all I want from my life is one statue. If I get one statue, I'll have made it." Which I thought was such an interesting way of framing this discussion
Mm,
on longevity.
mm,
To me, I guess you're talking about creation, and for me, maybe this is a form of creation. I mean, I guess it is, but for me, I guess it's my children. Um, for
mm.
me, my
Yeah.
longevity no longer matters, but I guess there's a sense of longevity in putting all your worth and your
Mm,
hopes into the young people who become the priority for you. Um,
mm,
so
mm.
yeah, it's interesting. I guess it becomes, what do we invest in when we know that
Yeah.
we're ephemeral? Yeah.
100%. Yeah. And
Mm,
it's like, uh, that's what makes our time here, us feel like it has some intrinsic values, whether it
mhm.
be the thing we create, the lessons we pass on to our children, the next generation. And yeah,
I mean,
it's
I say that, but the thing I say most to my children is, "Will you just put your shoes on?" So it goes both ways.
life's lessons are a series of you just put your shoes on.
Yeah. My daughter did the other day, right? She's almost 3, so I'll forgive her. I have this lovely copy over there. Should I name the book? I will name the book. It's Discovery by the Mintons.
Oh
And
yeah.
and I left it on the kitchen table, and I looked at my daughter as she was having breakfast this morning, and she picked up the book, and she looked at her bowl of oatmeal, and she just started to slowly dip it towards the oatmeal. I'm like, "Don't you dare!" She's like, "Ha ha ha ha! Oh, I'm going to do it." And I'm like,
Oh.
my daughter." And anyway, the book was saved. The book was saved. She was totally irrelevant to Pillars of the Earth, but it was a
Close
traumatic
call,
moment
close
for me a week.
call.
Yeah.
The
Can I
ephemeral
talk
nature
about
of books.
now before we went live? I told you that I wanted to tell you something interesting, if I can say it that way. That sounds very
Yeah,
conceited. About
yeah.
because I have a few notes to my side. When we do a discussion like this, I always like to have something a little bit pre-prepared, not just so I don't faff around as we've been doing.
100%.
And when and now you and I both. This is interesting. We both gave this the same spot in our top books of the year. Is that right? Number 3.
Yeah, yeah,
So
number 3.
for both of us, this was a book that we both tremendously enjoyed and put sort of pride of place. I mean, when you're reading dozens of books a year, number 3 is significant.
Mm,
And when I was drafting up my thoughts for this discussion, I usually do like positives, negatives, key scenes. I went to the negatives first. And
mm,
I didn't mean to, but that's where my mind went. And I started writing down a lot of negatives about this book.
mm,
I said, some of the characters have a tendency to kind of respawn and just come back and come back and come back. I've said, there's certain scenes in the beginning I really found a bit distasteful. The villain is quite flat and blunt, or one of them. And I started writing down some of these things we can get into later.
mm.
And so I found interesting, because I'm like, there are quite a few flaws in this book. I don't think it's a flawless book. In some ways, I think it's a very messy book.
Mm.
And yet, nevertheless, having written down all of that negativity, I stand by third place. Does that make sense? I had such a brilliant time with it,
Well,
despite all the things. I stand by that third place. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts about that.
it's actually very funny you mentioned that because I felt a little similar. I mean, even our little back and forth discussions over Instagram Messenger, I
Mm,
felt like we would sometimes gravitate towards some of the negatives first. And I think because it's a book that where its reputation precedes it. If
mm,
it's the second best-selling book of the 20th century, you've heard about it everywhere. It's constantly in the public consciousness, right? And so the positives almost feel like they're already apparent. So
mhm,
it's more interesting sometimes to dive into some of the things that didn't work for us. But
mhm,
that doesn't necessarily take away from the positivity of the book. And like you mentioned, I also felt that the characters there were a few of the characters, especially the villains, that felt their motivations were more one-dimensional.
mhm,
Um, Specifically, I guess like this is still spoiler free, but like if you looked at a William Hamley, he represented more of that blunt force villainy. If you look
mhm,
at Waleran, that was more of a calculated villainy. That
mm,
was a little bit more of the kind of nuanced villain that you might see in other books that you would go, oh, that's a very nuanced villain. So I kind of wonder if now that we're talking about it, if the function of the protagonists and the antagonists in the book, some of them were more one-dimensional. Is they're meant to symbolize something that Ken Follett was trying to get across, that, you know, cathedral building and the people who are involved in that kind of represent some of the best of humanity, in terms
Mm.
of creation. You know, the ability to create something out of nothing, the thing that has made our species survive, the ability to tell stories and work together around those stories to create something that is whole, is greater than the sum of parts. And in order to have that, you need this contrasted villain in someone like a William Hamlet, which is the blunt force opposite, where his only motivation is anarchy and destruction.
Yes.
And though, if you look at his character, it feels one dimensional, but juxtaposition against the tapestry of the story, it slots in really well.
He's a real wrecking ball, isn't he?
He is,
And
yeah,
and
absolutely.
without getting to spoilers, but Ken Follett is very aware. By the way, he
Mm.
did. I think it was Oprah's book club, or Oprah did his book as a book club. And there's a little interview with him where he just says, there is a character who is intentionally written as despicable all the way down. It's a
Yeah.
very intentional decision. I still don't know if it landed with me. I do understand, and he's, I think, often shown to be, or held up as one of these kind of villains that you love to hate. And again, I'm skewing negative. I'm not sure I did love to hate him. I had pure revulsion for this man.
Mm.
And I
Yeah.
think, and we can get into this in the spoiler chat, I think the way he is shown to be destructive was possibly a little gratuitous, maybe historically accurate, but gratuitous. So it's interesting that we're gravitating towards him, but he is in some ways deliberately so the least interesting character. I much preferred Walleran as the other kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
character, and he's an interesting one. Just piggybacking off what you're saying, because if William represents just pure destruction and the removal of longevity for kind of enjoyment's sake, Walleran wants something else, right? He is also after permanence in his own way, permanence that comes through power. So I'm wary of spoilers, but I think you're really right in contrasting those two villains against each other, and also how those two villains interact with each other. I found that quite fascinating.
Now that you're saying it, it kind of makes me think that both the protagonists and the antagonists are actually, in some respects, seeking permanence in an impermanent world, and it's just the way they choose to do it. Significance, I guess you could say, and the way they choose to do it. I mean, you think about some of the protagonists. They're trying to build this cathedral. They're
Hmm.
working together, in the year 1135 to do this thing that will outlast them. And you have Walleran, who wants power and permanence.
Hmm.
You have William Hamlet, who wants significance. And the only way he can make himself feel significance is tearing other things down. And
Hmm.
you get a sense of his insecurities from the very beginning, you know. I'll just say, to keep, before we launch into spoilers and things, the way he treats the objects of his desire is
Hmm.
often in the sense of the insecurity of, if I can't have it, no one can.
Yes.
Um, and so I think he is also not self-aware, but he is also aware that deep down, that he really doesn't have much to offer. He's not
Oh,
very
interesting.
redeemable.
Yes. I'm also just
You
thinking
know.
of the characters on the other side who maybe are not seeking after that permanence the same way. And who seems to me to be the only character on the force of good who is maybe not seeking out some kind of longevity, and she's happy to be where she is and to be comfortable where she is.
Mm.
Aside from that, about the monk, the other maybe group that isn't seeking longevity are the monks who are just complaining and drinking beer, which, to be honest,
Right,
is not a bad existence, is it?
right, right.
But it's
Bread
interesting.
and beer.
Maybe if we were to reframe this discussion, maybe it's not so much about the good guys seeking permanence through the cathedral and the bad guys not, as we kind of identified in the case of Willaround. Maybe it's more complicated than that, and it's how you approach that longevity, and why you want that longevity, and the purpose. I guess there's
Mm.
a question that follows up to that, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about this.
Yeah,
Who owns the cathedral? This cathedral that's being built, who does it belong to?
that's a very good question. I Okay, so here's one thing I found that was very interesting, is kind of everyone takes ownership of the cathedral in some certain respects, and that's kind of what allows them to push as hard as they do. So I guess maybe this might be a good time to kind of talk a little bit about the arc of the story, because I think that kind of factors
Mm,
into this
yeah.
thought. We have a character named Tom the Builder and his family. They're finding refuge in the forest. Famine going on for the people who are part of the forest, and you have on one side of the coin you have them, and you have the monks who are also trying to create something of lasting value that will bring people to Kingsbridge, a very small village that really doesn't, in a kind of nondescript place. At the same time, you have the political intrigue of the monarchy. So you have these three different forces that are kind of all affecting each other. And maybe all of them kind of want to take ownership of the cathedral, on a personal note, because it allows them to have the life they desire.
Mm,
Tom the Builder wants to build the cathedral because he absolutely loves the craft of making one, to the
mhm.
point where, when he, and this is still very beginning of the book, so this is now kind of getting into maybe light spoilers, but he, when he has the opportunity to build other things, and he would have gotten some money for it for his family, he said no, it's got to be a cathedral. So he's also singularly minded, to much to his detriment and his family's detriment for that. You have,
Obsessed, even.
yeah, oh yeah,
Yeah.
that was another thing I think that Ken Follett plays along with quite a bit, which is the fine line between obsession and or I guess passion and obsession,
Yes.
and what it costs not only the person but the people around them, sometimes especially the people around them.
And interestingly
uh,
enough,
yeah.
intergenerational obsession, right? Where you pass this
Yes.
obsession down from group to group to
Yeah.
group. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And we start to see the intergenerational kind of motivations and conflict as well.
Mhm.
Then you have the priors like Philip, and the monks, and they want also something for Kingsbridge that will give them some sort of accolades, that would put it on the map, so to speak. You have the
Mhm.
monarchy who wants to use it as a form of control, or destroy the chance for Kingsbridge to become its own entity that
Mhm.
has its own, So maybe there's maybe each one wants to take ownership for their own reasons. I don't know. What do you think, man?
Well, and each of those factions, if you like, are terribly conflicted within themselves, right? Like this
Mm.
whole, I don't think we mentioned, or maybe we did, but the whole novel takes place in a period of English history with basically civil war and different monarchs. Or, and this isn't a spoiler because it's history. Different
Yeah.
monarchs taking power briefly, and that's happening at the same time inside the church itself. There's all this political maneuvering that's happening.
Yeah.
And even with the kind of the everyday laborers, there is still quite a lot of conflict. So it's not just these three forces vying against each other, it's also these three forces at war with themselves. And all of
Mm.
these things trying to build something permanent when kind of at the heart of all of these aspects is just conflict. It's a really
Yeah.
interesting disjunct juxtaposition. I don't know. I do find it a really interesting facet of
It's
the novel.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's kind of like an internal conflict, a conflict within them. It's a person's inner conflict. Then you
Yes.
have, it's almost like concentric circles. You have the personal inner conflict. You have the inner conflict within a particular group. Whether it be Tom the Builder and his crew had their own conflicts, the prior and his monks had their own inner conflicts, and then the monarchy had its own inner conflicts, and
Yes.
then the conflicts between these three groups.
Yes.
That's very interesting. I never thought of it that way before. That's why I love
Every,
these
every, everything I
discussions.
say is very interesting, Nikhil.
It is. Oh yeah, yeah. That's why I was particularly excited to chat with you.
Don't click on my channel and see the utter falsity that sentence is. Do you know? Can I just maybe spin in full circle because
Yeah,
I want to return to my point that I made a wee while ago about the fact that I still love this book, despite
yeah.
it having some very messy aspects. And I think it
Mm,
just comes down to this idea of immersion and immersion in the setting. Because you know how there are books when you read them and
mm.
you're so conscious all the time that you are reading a book, and I won't name specific authors because I don't want to skew things negative, but you're constantly aware what page you're on, and you're
Yes.
constantly aware that you have so many pages to go until the end of the chapter. And
Yeah.
there are other books that are books that you, and I don't even mean just books that are fun, because there are books that I can tear through and not know what page I'm on, and they're fun. But
Yeah.
this book felt highly immersive, and it's not just that it was a page turner, which it was. and highly enjoyable. You know, some people say that the prose is weak with this book. I would disagree. I think
Mm,
the prose is crisp and functional, and
yeah.
that's not to its detriment. But I was just, whenever I was reading it, I was just totally immersed in this setting, which in some ways was very familiar because obviously there's an overlap between fantasy and historical fiction. You know, add a
Mhm.
dragon and it's fantasy.
Right,
Um,
right.
but I felt so in this book when I was reading it.
Mm,
It's almost like the book disappeared and I was watching a movie in my mind, that sense of visualization, which I don't get from a lot of novels. You know, I'm usually
mm.
not like that. So I think that's part of the reasons why this book remains so high up for me is when I was reading it, I was so with it.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know if that's the same for you.
100%. I was
Yeah.
completely lost within the pages. There was, I think it was the last third that I just kind of fell into completely. And I
Mm,
just did not even look up pretty much until I was done with it.
yeah.
That's kind of feeling it was. And, I'm not sure if I've mentioned this to you before, David, but so Ken Follett, before he did was his kind of first historical fiction book.
Mm,
Before that, he was doing all political thrillers, World War II thrillers, all sorts of thrillers. And so he cut his teeth doing thriller novels. So he knew how to plot and pace a book in a way that feels like the pages keep turning. But except those books are like 300 pages. But he's been able to figure out that interesting recipe of how can we make this feel like a thriller novel? And like how those thriller novels where the pages keep turning, yet the characterization is very complex. The sprawling nature and the nature of time and these themes that are explored are also very big, right?
mhm.
So he's one of the few authors I feel like that has found that magic recipe to make a 900-page book fly like a 300-page one. You know,
I have a question for you in that regard, if you don't mind. I
yeah,
mean, I know we're
yeah,
still on
yeah.
spoiler free and we should probably be moving on, but
Mhm.
if Ken Follett is so for so many people representative of what historical fiction can be, if that's fair, if he's seen as kind of one of the granddaddies of historical
One
fiction.
of the pillars, would you say?
Ah, very good. If how much of that? I'm trying to think of a way to frame this. To what extent is he actually representative of historical fiction, and to what extent is he an outlier? Because it seems to me like he's very much forging his own path, coming from thrillers and things like that. If I were to try more historical fiction, because my historical fiction knowledge is this book, would
Yeah,
I
right.
find kind of something similar, or is this something more exceptional and outside the box?
I think in terms, at least for me, and I'm still diving into historical fiction as well.
Mm,
But I think the way he plots and paces his books are definitely an outlier. However, I think there are fantastic historical fiction authors out there who are able to paint the picture of something and tell a great story, but also be even more historically accurate. Ken
mm,
Follett uh, uses history as a backdrop
mm,
and then has very enduring characters that really work well with it. And he meticulously researches his books, but
mm,
the historical accuracy is not necessarily the paramount thing. Sometimes, for the sake of the story, he'll kind of veer in and out.
mm,
If you look at his Century trilogy, which is another series he's done, he will paint the picture of characters interacting with world leaders or something, but it'll still be in line with what the world leaders might have done in certain situations, but again, it's still more fabricated. I think, like, if you look at other authors like James Michener or somebody like that, they're probably in that similar echelon. But if you look at, I've heard of other authors who really kind of like take the historical aspect of it, and then the fiction part is less. That's like a different
yeah.
ratio. So, yeah, I think he's an outlier probably in terms of how he plots and paces everything.
You know, the only other historical fiction that I can remember reading is War and Peace, if that
Oh
counts.
yeah, yeah.
And that's just literally. I mean, I'm sure that there's historical liberties taken, but Tolstoy will literally just take a letter, a genuine letter from Napoleon to Person X, and this
Mm.
chapter is just this letter from Napoleon. Read it, and
Mm.
then we'll move on. So I totally
Wow.
understand
Yeah.
what you're saying here. Not that Tolstoy isn't masterful with characters. I mean, flipping Tolstoy, but this did feel a lot more kind of zoomed in. Maybe I should just get away from Tolstoy because he does everything masterfully. But I did notice in Pillars of the Earth how
Yeah.
yeah how small scale in a way it was, and I enjoyed that small scale nature of it.
Well, yeah, actually, that's a very good point because I think ultimately it seems like a big novel in the sense that all this time all this time, multiple generations of people, all that. But really, it's a story about the people.
Mm,
It's a story about this one family. It's a story about this one set of monks. You know, it's a story about this one couple of sets of kings that are in the civil war at the time.
yeah.
But it zooms in these particular POVs that really makes you feel like, oh, now I'm inside this one room with these characters.
Mm,
So I love the way he juxtapositions that, you know.
yeah. Certainly, it was just really well done. And I guess if we are wrapping up spoiler free, I want to reiterate that I have qualms, and I don't think this book is for everyone.
Yeah.
Particularly, I mean, I'll just be frank in its portrayal of sexual violence.
Yeah.
I can totally understand why it would be a hard DNF. And in some ways, it's not actually. I mean, we kind of frame it as something quite literary. This book, and I think the novel markets itself as something literary and with pedigree. It's also a
Mm.
bodice ripper, man. Like there's a lot of feistiness going on in this story, and I
Yeah.
think that lends to its page turning elements. But
Right.
all that being said, it was one of my most fabulous reading experiences of the year, and I'm so
Yeah.
glad that I packed this, despite it being about 2 kilograms in my suitcase when I moved to Japan, because it really was an immensely rewarding time.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
definitely. Definitely. Yeah. And I think there's something to be said about uh, reading a book like this where you know you're in for a long ride. You know you're in for a long ride with these characters, but you can read it at a pace that feels comfortable for you. You know,
Mm.
you could read 50 pages. This is not like a book where you completely lose immersion. So you could read 50 pages, set it down for a couple of days, pick it up again, kind of pick up where you left off, or you could binge read it, and that would also be fine as well.
We're
Um,
such fantasy fans that 50 pages of reading feels very light and chill.
right, right, exactly, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, who reads books less than 700 pages, anyways? You know,
absolutely. Not worth it.
if it's not 2,800 characters, I don't want to know about it.
700 pages is a pamphlet, Nikhil, let's be honest.
A pamphlet, yeah, exactly. That could have been an email, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I guess let's maybe dive into a little bit of spoilers because I really want to unpack some of these thematic references. You know, I know we've talked about creation versus destruction. Yeah, I think it would be really fun to kind of go a little deeper into that. Were there any other themes that struck you, David, that you really kind of gleaned from this book that were exciting for you? And yeah, maybe we can kind of
So,
dive into some of the plot elements.
so someone left a comment somewhere, and I can't remember where it is. But I want to maybe zoom in on it for a sec. If I can find it, I'll let you know. But they compared, it was very interesting. They kind of called Pillars of the Earth a proto Game of Thrones.
Mm,
And I think that refers to some elements that I mentioned before. You know, it's a bit of a, although it's very literary in some ways, it's also very much a bodice ripper and
mm,
sensational in some ways. Um, so I was thinking about this comparison with Pillars of the Earth and a Game of Thrones. And I think, and this goes to your question about thematic stuff, I think one of
yeah.
the key differences between Game of Thrones and Pillars of the Earth, it's this theme of practicality versus principle. Because in both books, and I'll try not to spoil Game of Thrones too much for the one person who hasn't read it, um, in both novels, there really is this question of should I do what my heart tells me to do, or should I do what is the most practical, kind of efficacious, will yield the best results for me and my loved ones? Kind of a question. And I wonder if you would agree with me on this. Ultimately, in this novel, in Game of Thrones, I think practicality wins out. I think the person who is more practical and realistic is the person who succeeds, generally speaking. And I
Mm,
think in Pillars of the Earth, principle, generally speaking, you say that Jack Jackson, for example, is very much a man of practicality. But I feel like a lot of the characters who are venerated as the best people are the ones
yeah.
who go by what they think is right. And those are the people who are ultimately validated in the end. And the people who are a bit more schemy and plotty and underhanded are the ones that are shown to be false. So I guess there's a bit more
Mm.
light here than there is in something like a Game of Thrones. But yeah, basically practicality versus principle was one thing that was sticking out to me.
That's very interesting, actually. Yeah, I mean, I think principle felt, at least for me, from when I was reading about the protagonists, like say a Jack Jackson, Tom the Builder, Prior Philip. You know, these were
Yes.
kind of three central beacons of light in Kingsbridge and kind of the adjacent area. Um, their principle was both a blessing and a curse for them, ultimately. You know,
Yes.
Tom's principle of I want creative freedom led his family into famine, and yet was the reason why Kingsbridge happened. I mean, the whole town could not have come up in the way that it did had it not been for Tom Builder.
Hmm.
Prior Philip always wanted to be pious at the same and follow God's word, um, uh, at sometimes detriment to the people around him. You know, Jack Jackson and was it Aliena?
Right.
Aliena?
You. It
I
is
never know
Aliena.
the
Aliena.
pronunciation. Yeah, yeah, Aliena.
Alien A.
Uh, Alien A. Yeah, exactly. You know, and their dynamic, and then Tom Builder and gosh, I'm gonna forget the name of the woman with the
Ellen
golden eyes.
with the golden eyes. That's Ellen, right?
Ellen, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right, yeah.
Lives in the
Um, eh,
forest.
right, lives in the
Yeah.
forest, exactly. Yeah, so you know, Philip creates a lot of problems for them due to his wanting to stick to a particular principle, and it also has ramifications for the build site ultimately, and kind of his dreams of having Kingsbridge come up. You know,
Yes.
Jack Jackson also has his own kind of principles that makes him butt heads with some of the people at the building site, and ultimately he gets exiled and has to
Side
leave the
quest.
building. Side
Yeah.
quest, yeah, exactly. So all this to say, I completely agree with you that the people who were on the protagonist side ultimately, you know, those that practicality won the day, but the people who were had a megalomania about them were, of course, their eventual ruin. But it was interesting to see from a more short-term perspective both were double-edged swords in a lot of ways. Like that
Yeah.
megalomania initially really helped out the antagonists because they
Yes.
didn't play by the same rules of piousness and principle as the protagonists. So they were
And
able to go and like, oh, let's smash up this build site. Let's just take over this area, you know, and let's burn the whole town down. You know, it's like
again,
they didn't. Yeah, again, yeah, they did not subscribe to the same principles. So maybe short term it was a detriment. Maybe long term it was a success for
yeah.
me. What do you think about that? I don't know. Do
Well,
you
I think
disagree?
you're right, and I think you're raising a good point with when the protagonists are butting heads with each other, and that's something I did quite enjoy about this novel. I mean, when I was a kid, I used to sit next to my mother and watch. Do you know what Coronation Street is?
Oh, of course. Yeah, it's like the
Of
longest
course, so I love the
running.
enthusiasm.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
my mother
My
used to just
grandma in England watches
yeah.
it a lot. Yeah.
My mother is a incredibly. I hope she doesn't watch this. I don't want to make her to hear all these amazing things I'm going to say. She's very smart. She's very empathetic. She's wonderful, funny, um, and quite professional in a lot of ways. But her little passion on the side for many years was watching soaps.
Mm,
Coronation Street being the one. And so what I would do when I was kind of the top end of primary school, when I probably shouldn't be watching it, but it was quite a nice little bonding moment.
mhm,
I would sit next to my. She probably didn't want me there, to be honest. She's like, "This is my refuge." But anyway, I'd sit next to her on the sofa, and I'd watch, an episode of Coronation Street with her, not understanding what was happening. And
mm,
I used to ask my mother when two characters were just having a fight with each other, of some kind of conflict, and I didn't understand the conflict. I would just turn to my mother and I'd say, "Who's right, Mum? Which one's right?" 'Cause
mm.
tell me who to root for, essentially, which is
Yeah.
probably exposing quite a inadequate part of my personality that I need someone to tell me who's right.
Yeah.
But
It's
who's right,
interesting.
Mum, is what I kept asking. And I remember one time I asked her this, and she turned to me and she said, "In this conversation, David, no one's right, or they're both right." And she was
Hmm.
probably trying to just flip me off. But that really struck with me when you said that they're both right and no one's right at the same time. And I often do apply that sentence to the fiction I read. And I think a lot of that is very much here with maybe I'd say with Philip and Jack, for example, or Philip's confrontation with the builders and they feeling disrespected, and he's also like, "Listen, I have a budget here. We're in flipping famine. I cannot afford you all. I'm trying to be blunt and upfront with you." And both parties are right, and that's
Yeah.
where the most interesting conflict to me comes from, and that's why maybe William I get a bit annoyed with.
Hmm.
I think
Yeah.
Robin Hobb is the master of this. I would say is the conflict where both parties are right. But
That's
anyway,
very
that's what
straightforward.
was
Yeah,
coming up for me.
that's brilliant. That's a really good point. I didn't think of it that way before, but you're absolutely right. It's when you look at another kind of conflict that was more in the second part of the concentric circle of conflicts, which was Jack Jackson and Prior Philip, who obviously loved and respected each other. But Philip wanted to
Mm.
do things a specific way. He wanted to do it by the book. Um, and Jack Jackson was a creative soul. He was very passionate. He led with passion first. So he found through that passion creative ways of building a cathedral in a way that like nobody has ever really done before, especially in that part of the world. And but Prior Philip wanted to do things his own way, and he had his own ambitions, but they were layered with that piousness. So there was neither one was wrong per se in those conflicts, but they both affected each other negatively, even with the love between them. So
And I love that line. I mean, it was 1,000 pages a month and a half ago, but there was a line where it was like Philip says to Jack towards the end of the novel when they've had a conflict. He says, "I don't like that we're not talking." And I think we can all kind of identify with that to various extents in our lives when we're having this incident with someone and it's tricky and you don't want to be in the same room as them. And that
yeah,
openness and actually quite nice representation from man to man, especially saying, I wish we were mates again. Was
there's
was
a
was quite
vulnerability to it. It's honest.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess there's an inversion of that vulnerability with someone like oh my goodness,
Mm.
Walleran and
Valorant.
William,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
these guys are butting heads and fighting. And as much as I don't like William's character, and for me he is one of the flaws of the novel, I don't think he works. Um,
Mm.
I really do appreciate that inversion of those pairs' relationships, because what does Walleran do with William? He uses religion as a means of succor to keep propelling him forward. It's not negotiation, it's not honest conflict. It's come to me, my son, and I will save you from damnation and now do the next thing. And it's
Yeah. Yeah.
it's coercion, not negotiation. And
Interesting.
although, and we can talk about William, we don't have to. I did that was the one part of William's personality, that warpedness and that corruptibility through manipulation of religion, and I did find very fascinating. There's a quote about John Donne, a poet a few hundred years ago who converted from Catholicism to Protestantism. And
Hmm.
there's a line about him. I don't know if he wrote it or someone else wrote it, but basically during that conversion, John Donne felt like he was walking like a thin edge with like hellfire beneath, because he's so aware
Wow.
of his own mortality. And this is a massive tangent. He's so aware of his own mortality, John Donne, that he's aware that any misstep will just bring him down into the fire, and that fear was always apparently there for John Donne. And I very much found that reminiscent of where William is in his own strange way, because he's aware of how despicable he is, and through his mother's character, he is constantly afraid of the hellfire, and having this
Yeah.
other terrible human being the person to give him succor, and then using that as a means of negotiation and getting what you want. Those
Mm.
elements and that triangulation I found really rich and fascinating. I don't know if you want to talk about William, or if there's anything else that you were finding fascinating in the same way that I was kind of compelled there.
Actually, now that you're talking about William and Weller and kind of their relationship and how religion was kind of used as a tool of manipulation and control,
Mm,
I'm curious. It just got me thinking the role of religion in various aspects of these different people's lives, whether it be, Jack Jackson, Tom Builder, maybe you could even say the antithesis of religion and religious institution in people like Ellen, who lived
mm,
in the forest, and then Prior Philip, because I think a lot of the conflict also came from views on religion. Like you look
yeah,
at Ellen, and she was very much would have been considered like a heresy, right?
yeah.
She was atheist, I guess you would say, or
Well, certainly hugely against institutionalized religion. And she peas on the
institutionalized
table,
religion.
doesn't she?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah,
she peas on the
definitely.
table. Yeah,
She leaves no stone unturned in that.
yeah.
And then you have Prior Philip, who actually tried to do things by the book, and I feel like he didn't necessarily use religion as a controlling device. He
Hmm.
he more used it as a well, our religion says this, the book says this, so we have to follow it. But he set that imposition on himself as much as anybody else. He didn't say that, because this is the thing and this is going to allow me to have XYZ. He doesn't think two steps ahead about it. Actually, it's a more honest take on his own view of his own religion.
And
Um,
you know what? We talk about Philip being a bit set in his ways and stuck and stubborn.
yeah,
The same video where I saw Ken Follett talk about Pillars of the Earth, he told it was, I think it was like questions for book club or something. I'll
yeah,
give it to you if you want to link it. He talked about his favorite scene in this novel, and I was about to ask you what you think it is, but then it's 1,000 pages long, and uh, Ken Follett's favorite scene in
mm,
this novel, according to this video, comes right at the end, and it's when Philip encounters Walleran. It's Walleran, right? Picking out the
yeah.
trash to eat, and he's
Oh,
in. It's Walleran, right? It's not. There's another dodgy priest. I think it's Walleran.
uh,
It
yeah,
is
I
Walleran,
believe so. Yeah, yeah.
and he takes him out of the gutter, and he puts him on the horse, and he brings him back to the cathedral, and he says, "Listen, you're not going to have a bloody inch of power, but we'll take care of you." And
Mm,
that, in a way, in a novel where religion is shown to be so manipulative, and actually by Walleran himself, there is
mm,
also that very uplifting, positive message, because it's very Jesus, isn't it? That kind of sacrifice and that image of Jesus
yeah.
in the Bible, turn the other cheek, generosity towards the people who have come against you. And although that isn't unique to Jesus, it certainly felt very Jesus-like in the way that Philip was doing it. And I did appreciate
Yeah.
the different facets of this diamond that is belief
Mm.
represented here. And I thought that was very interesting that that's called Ken Follett's favorite scene, because it's not the one I would have
That
guessed.
is, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
that is very interesting. Well, I
yeah,
mean, I think since he's been so intimately connected with this book and he wrote it obviously, and he
yeah,
he probably finds scenes in it that really speak to him that are not the obvious ones for that very reason.
yeah.
That scene was phenomenal, and I think like it really illustrates the point that Philip, he lived by those same principles he expounded on everyone else. He was one of the
Mm.
few. Speaking of which, I guess I would love to ask you, David. Like, did you have a favorite character in this novel?
That's a good question.
We've talked
I,
about our
I was
least
I was
favorite
pretty I
character.
was pretty damn upset when Tom Builder died. I'll tell you that much. I I thought
Yes.
when it happened in the novel, maybe this is, I mean, it's foreshadowed right at the start, with
Right.
William on his horse coming in. But see, I had to. I don't say I misread that scene. I thought it was a fake out the end of that chapter, because
Mm.
it's from Tom's perspective, right, where the blunt object comes down. I think it's the horse's
Yeah.
hoof, right, and just crunches his head in. And okay, obviously you're going to die from that, but there is a sense of maybe he's not dead, and he is kind of our
Mm.
protagonist in a way, because he is the first person we encounter on the page. So we're more inclined to think of him as a protagonist. And then when he
Yeah.
actually, um, his body is revealed to be utterly just wrecked, that did upset me. I think I messaged you that day. I was like, Tom,
I
but
remember that. I remember that.
at the same time, Nikhil, um, he's one of the dodgiest protagonists, I would
Mm.
say. Like, right, and I'm sure that I'm not alone in my confusion of this scene. But
Mm.
your wife dies. Your wife dies, okay? The woman you've
Yeah.
been with for years and years and years, mother to your children, died giving birth to your child, okay? You literally, your children are the supports from which your wife gives birth, and then you all nestle in together. Traumatic, hugely traumatic death scene. You've just left your son on a hill. And of course, I understand why this happens, because you cannot fend
Mm.
for them. It's not like you want this to happen. And obviously, that has ramifications later, that guilt.
Mm.
But then you just go to bed with Ellen. Like what is it, like 20 minutes later? Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
I would love to hear, and I'm not being sarcastic here, or facetious. I would genuinely, I do not understand. I do not understand why that had to be, from an authorial perspective, so smooshed together narratively. And it
Yeah.
made me
Yeah.
uncomfortable. And I'm sure that the intention was a little bit of discomfort, but I don't understand. I don't understand why it had to be framed in this kind of ethereal, magical way, where she's like a specter, or an angel coming out of the forest, and then they do the deed, and then immediately he's like, yes, and I am yours and you are mine. Like, I know there was that attraction between them at the
Yeah.
start, um, but the whole thing just felt very wonky and kind of gross. Maybe I'm
Yeah. No,
misreading. Maybe there's
I,
something that I'm not
I
getting out of it.
completely agree. I
Yeah.
completely agree. I mean, it also didn't that is one of the for me as well, one of the weaker elements of the book, that it seemed to, unlike everything else in the book, it seemed to lack a distinct purpose. You
Yes.
know,
It
you
felt
you
indulgent.
have, yeah, you have Tom Builder. He's walking with his wife in the forest. They're very starving, and their kids, and she's about to give birth. They encounter Ellen in the forest with Jack, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Jack.
and she said, Tom's wife even kind of mentions offhandedly, like, basically a jealousy about
Yes.
this
She's
woman.
aware. She's
She's
great.
very aware, yeah.
Yeah.
And like you said, she passes away, and Tom not only abandons his kid, but then like shacks up with this woman, seemingly just a few pages later. And one could argue maybe, oh, he was in like survival mode, and he clung to the next, the thing that would at least like appease him at that moment. He's probably not thinking clearly. He's just abandoned his kid. He's like obviously in a distraught kind of mode.
Mm.
His inability to think clearly in that moment. However, like you mentioned, the fact that Ellen is kind of thought of as almost like a magical creature. I almost wondered, is there going to be some sort of like a supernatural element in this, the way he's describes her. So yeah, it's interesting. I will say, with that whole supernatural description, by the way, one thing that also struck me was that people like Walleran also saw her as a supernatural being, almost
Yes.
out of time itself, because Ellen had interactions with these other people as well, and same with Prior Philip. So I don't know if she was meant to be an, because she is also one of the woods people. So I don't know if she was meant to be an entity that kind of brings a little chaos to the order of some sorts.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I don't know. But yes, I all this to say, this is a long-winded way of saying I agree. But yeah, didn't sit right with me. I'm just trying to think of the reasons why maybe Ken Follett wrote it that way, but I'm not
I,
really sure personally. Yeah.
I I'd love to hear. I've got one more comment in this topic, but then I'd love to hear your
Yeah.
favorite character too. So don't let me forget that. But one thing I
Sure.
do really like about the opening to the novel, and this kind of goes back to the framing of perspective, and also maybe do we do things out of our sense of moral compass, or do we things out of practicality? It kind of slightly relates to that. I really like how we don't get how awful Alfred is for a couple of hundred pages, because we're
Mm,
sitting in Tom's perspective. And although that scene with Ellen at the start is irksome to me, I love that we stay with Tom for so long in the beginning. And
yeah.
Alfred is his boy. And again, going back to the paternal thing, I totally get that. My boy. And his brother and his son is helping him build. And there's this, and they're standing in the field at the start, or the work site, and just drinking a beer, and like it feels very paternal in a very positive way. And then
Mm,
even when they go into the forest, Alfred wants to help and comes with them and gets into trouble. And unfortunately that causes conflicts. But I
yeah.
did kind of like that it's my boy is coming to help me. And then that perspective, because we're in Tom's POV, just gets slowly unstitched, and we hear Ellen go, I don't think you realize that he's doing a couple of things to my son. And then in the castle, we get from Jack's perspective the fact that basically Alfred basically is teasing him and bullying him
Mm,
by them, and but also Aliena is who we quite like. They
mm,
kind of bully him over the fact he doesn't understand how sex and childbirth works. Um, and then it's even later than that. It's really only I would argue, when we get to the cathedral itself, where Alfred becomes an out and out villain, and that we realize that this guy's kind of as reprehensible as William, just with less power. Um,
yeah.
and I love that slow, kind of methodical reveal, the extent to which Alfred is just, frankly, a jerk. And I think that was a very effective start. So I want to hear your thoughts on that, or I want to hear your favorite character.
Yeah, no, I actually completely agree. I think
Yeah.
Alfred really was a sociopath at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And he was not a very intelligent one. He was also kind of that blunt force, destructive force, ambitious, and also just a morally weak character amidst these people who kind of stuck to some sort of a moral principle.
Mm,
But I think Alfred was a young kid at the very beginning of the novel.
true.
So a lot of those sociopathic tendencies wouldn't come to necessarily to fruition. You might see seeds of it here and there, but it becomes more full blown as he grows up. And as he reaches adulthood, you see the full extent of it, because some of that stuff takes time to manifest. I felt like that was actually the most realistic portrayal of that, in a counterpoint to William Hamley, who really is just terrible from the very beginning. There is no
Yeah.
redeeming quality about him. He was a sociopath through and through,
Yeah.
Also not a very intelligent one, but he was
No.
uh he was conniving enough to be able to be a survivalist.
Yeah.
um so yeah, that's a very interesting point. I think
What do you go?
oh no, I was going to say, I think another fault of Tom the Builder, Tom Builder, is his love for his son, that he was blinded by um love or ambition, or he was always blinded by things. He could never see the full picture, whether it be his love for Ellen, his love for Alfred,
Yeah.
his kind of acting in the moment in a way that doesn't actually serve the best interests, but were because of his blindness, really. um yeah.
There's also some interesting moments of perception. What is it when Ellen leaves, or one of the times she leaves? And again, maybe the novel can be a bit repetitive sometimes. But one time, I think the first time she leaves him, Ellen, she says, I'm sorry to make you so sad. And he says something like, no, it's because you made me so happy. And it's the
Mm.
happiness that's tearing me apart. I'm paraphrasing slightly, but there are moments of perception.
Yeah, yeah,
And the
true.
character who is sort of the representation of the worker, he's very sharp at times. But
Oh
who's
yeah.
your favorite? And why is it William?
Of course. Who
Yeah,
else could it be? No, I that guy, I hated and loved to hate him.
that's interesting.
Meaning, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It's like I just wanted him gone. I wanted him to suffer. He was just so morally reprehensible to me in every way. How he treated Ileana, how he treated Kingsbridge in general. Um, as a counterpoint to that, to me, my favorite, like most badass character, is probably Prior Philip, because for
yeah,
all his faults, he was serving something greater than himself.
yes,
He would put his personal, he was self-aware to even see. He would ask himself sometimes, like, is this a sign of personal ambition?
yeah,
Am I doing this because I want something vain for myself, or am I doing this for the right reasons? He would even
yeah,
ask himself that. I think that was really cool. He lived by the teachings that he tried to expound on others, and he did that through and through in every situation, even if it was to the detriment of himself at times. But if it helped the greater good, he was all about it. um so
yeah,
I love that aspect of it. I loved his forgiveness of his enemies, while still
mhm,
being very strong in how he takes actions against his enemies, and he'd find ways to do it in a clever way. He was a very intelligent guy, actually. um
yeah,
and cunning in his own right, but because it was like cunning used for good, it didn't end up being the counterpoint, like Waleran, who was, cunning used for chaos, um, and personal ambition. So maybe they're kind of two sides of the seesaw or something.
I
I
like
don't know. How about you? Yeah.
I like with Philip, and he's one of my favorites as well. I really like how and it's an unfortunate thing with this novel. It's so long because I'm realizing there's so many avenues we can go down, and
Yeah, I know.
we're
Yeah,
probably
yeah,
not doing like 95% of the book justice. Like we haven't touched on Aliena, we've not
right.
touched on Richard, Jonathan, but staying
Yeah.
staying with Philip, I like, and this goes back to what you were saying about his strength. He kind of gets annoyed with himself at his own strength. Sometimes going back to principle, he's frustrated by his own principle.
Yeah.
When he going back to when Jack and Aliena's relationship is dissolved, you cannot live together. You're certainly not married. I'm sorry that the system in place has basically screwed you over, and you can't get married because you're
Hmm.
technically married to Alfred. However, the rules are that you can stay together, and he sticks by this, and you can also sense his own frustration and despair at having to be the one issuing that decree, and
Hmm.
nevertheless he issues that decree, which is you can interpret because it's this. We know it's the wrong decision. We know that he is killing this love, and actually at one point Aliena tries to leave him.
Yeah.
At the same time, I do kind of have a strange pride in a human being who will do something that they do believe to be right even when it's challenging. So there is a kind of interesting internal conflict there that it bubbles under the surface.
100%, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's like, even if Philip was fallible, as any human would be, it
Mhm.
was justifiably fallible. Like, it was fallible, but he was always trying to be better. You know, he was always trying to shoot for the highest standard that he could, and he also
Yes.
put that standard on others. And sometimes that was for good, for sometimes that didn't work out as well, but he did the best he could, I think. Given his principles, his philosophy, his moral standing. I will say, and I want to know yours as well, David, but I want to also briefly mention, since we haven't really mentioned Aliena,
Yes.
she would have been probably my second favorite character had it not been for some of the ways she treated Jack Jackson, and kind of some of the decisions she made later on in the book. But I thought it was incredible that she went through this horrible, horrible event with William Hamley, and she gets cast out of the castle. She escapes, with her brother, and they're just like in destitution. And she
Hmm.
somehow makes her way to Kingsbridge, and she somehow builds herself up to be like a wealthy merchant. And she just like does it from the ground up, completely by herself, a self-made woman. And in spite of everything, at the age of 16, doing that is
Yes.
so badass. I mean, it's just so incredible. And the way they built her character up in that first like third or half of the book, oh my God, I just loved it. I don't know. What do you think? Yeah.
One thing I particularly enjoyed, and I think why in some ways this novel deserves its page count, and this might seem like it's not an answer, but I promise it is.
No, no, yeah.
Is the idea of labor in this book, both from the reader's perspective and from the character's perspective. Like there are so many characters who work really hard, and
Mm,
despite there being significant time skips in this novel, we see that hard work, and we have to experience that hard work on the page too.
yeah.
So, for example, we have to watch at the very beginning Tom Builder flip and go from town to town to town, going, "Is there work? No. Is there work? No. There's still not work? No, there's still not work." And we go through about
Mm,
70 pages of just Tom and his family going from town to town, and it doesn't really develop the plot that much.
mm,
But when he finally does get work in Kingsbridge, it feels really rewarding because we've been on
mm,
this journey with him and we've seen how challenging what that was. And it wouldn't have that same sense of reward if we didn't go through that journey with him, I guess is my point. And I think that's also the same about Aliena. Because we see her make this pledge to her father, and we can talk about loyalty and obligation as well as a theme in this novel. And because that's really Aliena's central journey, isn't it? I mean, one of her central journeys is overcoming the obligation that she kind of stupidly made to her father, in my view. Um,
mm,
we see her, as you just said, go from potential place of employment to potential place of employment. Consider very briefly the brothel and actually kind of giving up yourself to try and make money to survive. And so
mm.
when she then gets the wool job, and not gets the wool job, actually creates this wool job and builds her empire. It feels so rewarding because we went on that journey with her for a significant length of time.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then, of course, it gets stripped away at another point. But that kind of watching that resilience and that rags to riches story could come across as very trite and frankly unbelievable. But because we take it in each step, I also quite resonated with that. Aliena frustrated me
Mm,
a lot,
yeah,
I should say,
yeah.
and aspects of her character frustrated me a lot. But that aspect I found interesting.
That's a fascinating point, actually. Yeah. Speaking of some of the things that frustrated you, we were probably very much aligned in it.
Yes,
You know, I think when the town burns down, and she loses all her stuff. And she had placed a lot of identity in her being a self-made woman, to the
yes,
point where she was also shrugging off any potential suitors. She's like, I don't need anybody. I can do this all on my own. I'm going to take care of my brother. It's like she was going to be that person. And so her whole
yeah,
identity was kind of in that. So when she lost all her
yes,
material possessions and basically all her money in that fire, she didn't, I think she lost who she was. She forgot who she was, or it was obscured. And so any decision she made directly after that felt like someone who had lost their way. And so I can empathize with that,
yes,
but it still grated me the way she treated other people. That she
yes.
was
I
very
think that's fair. I
cruel
think we have to
to
humanize
people.
her.
Sorry?
Yeah. There was a no, it's okay. There's a level of cruelty. Sorry, I think that's a good way of putting it. And I think I think I sent you many lengthy voice messages that you should frankly just disregard. But I did send you one on Aliena towards the end because I was getting increasingly frustrated, and I had to do to draw a parallel maybe to Felice and Paran in Dead House
Yeah.
Gates, where this character has gone through a lot, and if you just judge people by what they've done without taking the depth of what they've experienced, then it does become a bit more feasible and comprehensible. Yeah, she's certainly interesting, and I did enjoy, and I enjoyed her success at the end. And maybe it was a bit cheesy, where she kind of goes, what does she say? I am free from my obligation at the end. She literally yells it into the courtyard, which
Yeah,
maybe felt a
yeah,
bit
yeah.
hammy. Nevertheless,
Yeah.
I did really enjoy the fact that she got that moment and that she returned to the castle where everything fell apart for her, and was able to reclaim that space. And again,
Yeah.
this might come across in the hands of a lesser writer as a bit idyllic, a bit hammy, a bit cheesy. But
Yes.
I think because Follett takes us on that journey so keenly, it does feel more rewarding than silly.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes.
I agree.
Yeah.
I love what you said, David, about like how everything feels earned.
Yes.
You know, that even the William Hamley's fate feels earned, you know. Oh, he's
Yes.
more
Yes.
than
Yes.
earned it. He's more than earned it. But no, you're right. Like every single character, kind of what they go through is what makes those victories or defeats feel especially heavy, because we've
Yes.
been through that journey with them. And
Yes.
and Ken Follett puts you on the ground floor with these characters. So
Yes.
it's never like a zoomed out thing. So you do see the sum of parts, you do see a zoomed out perspective, but everything is very much personal. Um,
I Yeah,
yeah,
I'm conscious of our time, but one thing I wanted to add in
yeah,
that
yeah,
regard, we're talking about kind of being on the ground floor. I like that when we encounter the nobles and the kings and the archbishops, they're just dumb people. I really appreciated that. They're dumb people with trappings. And we encounter, is it Stephen, his name is, about the midpoint in the novel.
yeah,
Philip meets Stephen.
yeah.
And he gets tested by putting on the soldier's armor and escorting him out into the battlefield. But he doesn't actually, and honestly, that could be a really good scene where the king is very savvy and he's working things out and he's calculating and
Mm,
everything he says has multiple meanings. But my reading of that scene is, okay, that a very interesting thing. Okay, put on my soldier's armor and walk with me. Slowly just becomes, oh no, this guy's an idiot. Like he's
mm,
stupid. And,
yeah,
and actually having that veil torn away was very effective. And then we see Maud, and Maud's also there and there for like 4 pages, and she's just a bit imperious and nothingy. And my
yeah.
understanding from the history is actually there was a second person who was actually pulling the strings, but I could be wrong there. And
Mm,
every monarch we meet, and even the resolution of this whole conflict is basically, right, I'll be king, and then I'll die, and you can be king. And it was like,
right.
that's stupid. I know that's historical,
Yeah,
but at the same time, it just shows like they're basically just sharing their toys.
yeah,
And all
yeah.
these people,
100%.
and all these people in this medieval feudal system just have, I think I'm using those terms correctly, basically just have to suffer because of the incompetence at the top, which never happens in real life, does it, Nikhil? There's no one at the top
No,
who's
no, of
thoroughly.
course not. Yeah, what are you talking
It's,
about? Yeah.
I
No,
appreciated that element too, is what I'm trying to say.
that's a very good point. Yeah, I mean, a lot of these people were elected by some preordained reason, not
Yeah.
due to their intellect. They didn't have to be, and so
Yes.
they could be easily manipulated in these situations, as we saw. People like Prior Philip had to be, intelligent in order to not only build the town and cathedral of his dreams, but also stave off the political machinations of fellow monks, of monarchy. I mean, he was kind of from all sides. There was many different motivations to balance. So you needed
Mhm.
someone savvy in that role. They just couldn't
Mhm.
have been without it. Whereas
Yes.
monarchy did not need to be savvy.
Yeah.
Uh, they were by their position, their title alone. That's where they got their power. It was the title. It wasn't anything else.
There's a huge, or there was when I was in school. I'm sure it still exists, but maybe because I've moved out of the country, I don't hear from it as much. But to what extent do the royal family in the UK exist? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
we've inherited the system, and there's the argument that it brings in tourism and that the royal family earn more than they produce more money than they retain. But still, like,
Mhm.
at the center of British culture, without laying my own cards on the table, although maybe it's fairly transparent, why do we have this system that is basically just a hand me down from hundreds of years? and as a direct descendant actually of the novel we're talking about right now.
Oh no, 100%. And
Yeah.
I think like I don't know. I think about this that sometimes it's like when the past and the future meet. There's like a nexus point, and
Yes.
the past never fully goes away, or doesn't at least for a while, and the future never kind of entrenches itself completely. I mean, you think about human history. This book is supposed to have taken place 900 years ago or something, right?
Yes.
And 900 years is not a long time in the history of the world. It's a
Yes.
right? Like what would that be? 10, 12, 12 generations or something like that. Something like that, right?
Well, don't put it that
Or
way. That's terrifying. Yeah.
yeah, or maybe it's more. Maybe it's more,
No,
like
it
15
must be
generations.
more. But I'd be
Yeah.
curious. If we say there's 20 years to a generation, 25
Oh,
years,
is it
then I guess
20?
we're
Okay,
talking.
okay, never mind. Yeah, yeah. But still, I mean, it's like
yeah,
you could trace it back.
40 generations. Someone
40
in the comments
generations.
can correct us if we're
Yeah.
way off.
Right,
Yeah.
right, exactly. Yeah. Math ain't mathing this morning.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so I think like the vestiges of the past and the future are going to meet, you know.
Yeah.
You see that actually as a theme in this book as well, which is kind of interesting. Is you
Well,
see, yeah.
sorry.
So no, that's basically what I was gonna say. Is you see it in the book as well, and I think it echoes real life. But
Well, I was just going to say on that note. Hang on, I'm going off screen for a second.
I do love your background, by the way.
Thank you. You think it's a green screen, but I'm actually in Kingsbridge Cathedral.
I mean, that's what I figured. Yeah.
Talking about the fact that we were watching time progress and how these things all bleed into each other, I do actually have book 2, World Without End.
Oh boy, nice.
Now,
Yeah, I
this is
have
a
it.
tiny-
It's sitting on the shelf as well. So
Do you want to see something though? I don't know if this will come across on the screen. That is the tiniest font I've ever seen. Look, this is my hand. I know it's called green screen. Okay, my hand is a normal sized hand. Can you see how tiny that font is? This is going to be a magnifying glass.
magnified, maybe
So
even
I
a
can do it.
telescope.
I can put it in the context of this novel here, right? Sorry,
Right,
forgive me.
right.
But it's interesting you say that, because I know that in books to come, we jump
Yeah.
100, 200, 300 years in the future per book until we get to, I believe, the 1800s.
Right.
So I wonder if that's going to be a recurring theme, is just this idea that the elements of the past. And this goes back to our initial conversation about permanence. These elements of the past and how they bleed into future generations, and what spills over and what turns to dust.
Yeah. Well, I think it's it's that constant desire by humans to seek permanence in an impermanent world. You saw it in the characters. You saw it in the way they tried to build the cathedral or gain significance in political ways. We see it in our world all the time. It's like we're all constantly trying to in whatever way we choose gain a foothold against the passages of time. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons why this book and maybe even the series endures so much, is it's really about them all. It's not about the cathedral. It's not about Tom Builder. It's not about any one particular person, actually. Yes, you may have some main POVs, you may have people you root for, but ultimately it's about them all. They all have a role. Even, unfortunately, William Hamlet has a role of great significance in the tapestry of this book,
And the fact that we all keep on keeping on. And yeah, and the fact that it's not, we speak about generations, but sometimes the language of generations is quite untidy, because it's not like every 25 years a new crop of people is born. We all just kind of mingle together and move up the chain together. And that 100%. To an extent, if I'm understanding you correctly, is a monument in itself.
That's beautifully said, man. Yeah.
I don't know. It's 1:15 in the morning, so I could be absolutely waffling.
I buy it,
Yeah.
Anyway. Only deep conversations here,
Yeah. But no,
but beautifully stated, man.
I really enjoyed this book. And just to return to that initial thing I said again, it's messy. It's not without its flaws. And I think we are maybe too light on the flaws in the discussion that seems to be had around this book. But nevertheless, it was marvelous. It was both, and utterly deserving of a number 3 spot from both of us. I did notice though that your number 2 was a similar historical fiction, right? So those two are very much neck and neck. What was it? It's called. Forgive me, I forget the name of it.
It's called the Heaven Tree Trilogy, and the 3 books are in an omnibus that are about 900 something pages total. So the whole trilogy
Yeah.
Yeah, it's much shorter. The whole trilogy is about the size of Pillars of the Earth. And it's interesting because Pillars of the Earth is about a guy who builds a cathedral in the 1100s.
Mhm.
Heaven Tree is about a guy who builds a cathedral in the 1200s. So why would they be so different? But it's a completely different approach, different themes. And if you want character nuances that
Mhm.
feel like they have a lot more, I won't say depth because there's a ton of depth in Pillars of the Earth, but there's like a form versus function debate, I think, in Pillars of the Earth, and it's almost skewed the opposite way in Heaven Tree. So
What do you mean by that?
sorry. Oh, so
What? Yeah.
so this Pillars of the Earth, the cathedral is a beacon. It represents creativity, but it also represents a feat of engineering. So there's a lot of
Yes.
engineering principles in this,
Yes.
whereas and a lot of the themes of trying to find permanence in an impermanent world. Whereas Heaven Tree trilogy, it's more an artistic perspective. So
Mm.
everything starts from the molding of something from nothing into everything, and
Yes.
into something that endures. So it's all artistic, and it's like, you know, there's themes of redemption and forgiveness and other things. Themes where you think it's going to be about one thing, and then it becomes something else. So it's a very different take on the same same plot, essentially.
Do you know,
Fantastic.
you're making me think of, and this again is a slight night's move thinking. One thing I love about Japan, and this is we're now moving into temples and not cathedrals, or
Mm,
castles, forgive me, not cathedrals.
yeah.
One thing I love about Japan, and this kind of relates to our idea of permanence, is you'll go to a castle in Japan, the Osaka Castle or Hiroshima Castle or what have you, Odawara
Mm,
Castle, and they'll say something on the placard like, "Oh, this castle has been here since 1200 AD. This castle has been
mm,
here since 1350 AD." And you're like, "Wow, this building is actually 750 years old." And then you
yeah.
look at the fine print. This castle burned down in 1400 and was rebuilt. This castle was burned down 1557 and
Wow.
rebuilt. And it actually turns out
Wow.
this castle is not actually magnificently old. It just keeps getting destroyed and rebuilt and destroyed and rebuilt. And the thing you're looking at, I mean, Hiroshima Castle, I'm assuming can't be more than 50, 60 years old. Although pinch
Mm,
of salt there needed to. I'd have to fact check that. But for it seems to me, being not an expert on Japan, I just live here and buy my onigiri. In Japanese culture, the permanence comes from the fact that this thing has been here for so long, and it's
yeah.
when we knock it down, we build it back because the actual object, it's like the ship of Theseus. The object isn't actually the important thing; it's the representation of that object and the fact that we're carrying this legacy forward, which I
I
think
think of
relates
the
to a lot
ship
of
of Theseus actually when you mentioned that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Which is
yeah,
the, just for anyone watching who doesn't know that example, it's like if you remove one board from the ship and replace it, is it still the same ship? How about two boards? How about all the boards on the ship? You know,
yeah,
um that make up the make up this wooden ship. Is it still the same ship? And you see that actually even in Pillars of the Earth is cathedral comes down a couple times. It's not a
yeah,
steady build of the cathedral. There's a lot of obstacles in the way, but it's about what it represents. I think, like
yeah,
you so aptly mentioned, David. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So, on the whole, your
Brilliant.
thoughts on the novel mirror mine, but kind of broadly extremely positive, but also kind of question marky at points, right? Would that be fair?
I would say, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it was very similar to you. There's certain gripes I had with it, like we talked about the one dimensionality of William Hamley,
Mhm.
about some of Aliena's choices, some of Tom Builder's choices, and again, the some of the intentionality of that was maybe there. Some of it maybe could have been paced a little bit differently, I think,
Mhm.
also, like especially
Yeah.
the beginning with Tom Builder. But ultimately, I felt like this was a triumph, and I'm so excited to read the next one with you, David. So yeah,
How
it's gonna
many?
be
How many are there? There's
I think
six.
there are six, yeah. So we got our work
I know
cut
there's
out
the
for it.
prequel. It's two pamphlets. We're fine.
Right, yeah, yeah, exactly, yeah. In fantasy terms,
Yeah, yeah. I think
Um,
it's going to be a good time. And listen, we've been saying over message, we don't have any idea what our schedule will be for getting through these books. Maybe 4 years, maybe 30 years, just like the characters down the line when we get to
exactly,
see.
yeah, yeah. It
But
endures.
I am excited to continue.
Me too. Me too. I'm very excited as well. And for all of you watching, we will let you know and put up a community post or something when we start the next one. If anyone wants to join in,
Hmm.
I'll put up a channel in the Discord or something like that. But I really appreciate you all watching. Thank you so much for being on this journey with us as we dove into Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. And David, thank you for joining me on this journey, my friend. It's so much better reading it with you because I've really enjoyed our voice notes over this time and
Yes.
going, chapter by chapter and just kind of letting the book wash over us. So thank you for being here. Thanks for everything, man. And thanks for staying up so late for this
No, it's good.
discussion.
Listen, I'd rather stay up late than wake up early. So in my view,
Yeah.
you got short shrift here. So yeah. Listen.
No,
I said at the start.
it's an
I said
honor.
it before we went on. I said it when we went live. It was a real joy to interact with you on this because I know we're doing the Drowned Kingdom reread or
Mhm.
read, I should say, which
Yeah.
is fun in its own right. But there's something quite nice about having a one-to-one as well. So appreciate you.
Absolutely. Me too, man. I'm so looking forward to the next part of the journey. So
Cool.
thank you so much all for being here. I'm Nikhil with Shelf-Esteem. And be good to yourselves. Be good to each other as always. I'll see you on the next video. Take care.